Hey you, I'm stoked. I got invited to participate in a community healing event at the Philadelphia VA. I got invited by an Iraqi citizen who has immigrated here in 2015 and is now a tour guide at the UPenn Museum. It is a powerful ceremony. Veterans are given an opportunity to speak about their story to the public at large, focused on moral injury. I'm given 6 minutes. We all know I can't keep it in 6 minutes. There's a lot to talk about. So what I'm doing instead is just, here you go. And this way I can look at this video and figure out which 6 minutes I'm going to share. If it resonates with you, if it hits you, if it's something that you feel the community needs to be aware of, feel free to share it. I give you full green light and actually encourage you to go ahead and share my little perspective. This is in dealing with moral injury. So my task, my assignment is to define moral injury, what it means to me, and then share my story. Moral injury, I'm just going to go with the definition that scholarship has given us because it's smarter than I am. Moral injury is a betrayal of what is right by a legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation. Moral injuries occur specifically for service members when they perpetrate, fail to prevent, witness, or learn about acts that transgress their values or beliefs. Such moral and ethical challenges can shatter an individual's belief about rightness of the world, degrade trust in leaders, and breed a sense of disillusionment and moral conflict. Religious and cultural therapies are not only possible, but may well be superior to what mental health professionals can conventionally offer. PTSD, as officially defined, is rarely what wrecks veterans' lives or crushes them to suicide. Moral injury does both. The group will share stuff like that. My moral injury comes from something else. This is a letter I wrote to my entire email list February 4th of 2005. So I would have been 23, halfway through my first tour. I was a truck driver on the roads of Iraq. And if anybody's been to Iraq, you know that the roads are, kind of exciting. Dear all, a friend sent some information regarding the DoD contract with KBR, the overall company in charge of rebuilding Iraq, along with our base security, as well as extra logistics the military really can't handle. Honestly, as well as their cooks, as well as our... You could not turn around without bumping into some civilian that had been contracted out largely through KBR or a subsidiary or another. I mean, it was just, they were all over the place, specifically in Iraq. You didn't run into too much of that in Afghanistan because Afghanistan's a logistical nightmare, as I learned. Along with our extra logistics that the military really can't handle, the comforts that the soldiers need in order to wage this modern war. After all, I'm busting my butt as it is. Hee hee. It's the extra logistics part. But the information is something I don't think has its proper place in the public eye. I talked with an individual who worked with our fob Spiker near Tikrit, who said they would be making close to $150,000 working for KBR this year. I was pulling home $30,000 and I thought that was awesome as a soldier. I asked what they did, and they described sitting at a desk monitoring a sign-in sheet for internet use. That's really all. I asked, I was like, surely there's something else. Now I know the area is dangerous, but I found that bill a bit hard to swallow. Halliburton subsidiary Kellogg Brown and Root says the bill for providing services to troops for the current fiscal year will exceed $10 billion. Yet the DoD only budgeted for $3.6 billion. The DoD has made up some of the shortfall by cutting back on requests from KBR, but admits that there is still a shortfall of at least $3 billion. One website I found, that's for that year. Oops, sorry, we overspent $10 billion. I know that you only told us that you'd pay us 3.6, but we're going to need at least $7 billion that year alone. Folks, I titled this, No Wonder We Can't Afford This War. The weapons of mass destruction were called off in January that year, so a month prior, called off. Their first allegedly democratic election was held on the 23rd, I believe. I thought about sharing the story that I had where I had a man dead to rights that I assumed had a trigger for a car bomb that I had passed my convoy. I can't believe I didn't pull quite hard enough to actually eliminate him, but the whole time I was sitting there going, man, if I kill him, there's no real threat. Newsweek's going to be down my throat. It's Abu Ghraib. It's all over the place, right? And if you read the rules of engagement, CFLIC rules for use of force, it doesn't really feel like you're waging a war against an objective, identifiable enemy. It feels like you're waging a war against a subjective thing like terrorism, a war on behalf of the economy, not a war to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that really pissed me off when I wrote that email. And I thought that was bad. Some private entity mooching that the vice president happened to have worked with and for when it was first set up to be an entity that could rebuild Iraq, logistics support, oil support, back in the Gulf War days when we didn't overthrow and topple in the name of whatever. Military industrial, I'm concerned. They called off the weapons of mass destruction in 2005, January. I wrote that email a month later, and I was like, cool, pretty soon we no longer have the excuse we used to get here, we can leave. And then we were there for another 7 years. And in Afghanistan for another 15 before walking away, handing it over within a month. In Afghanistan, my job was to provide the logistics capability for the largest Special Forces mission since Vietnam. Special Forces mission is to embed, live within the populace, train force multipliers, individuals, military-aged males, train them to defend themselves. So if they don't want communism, they're going to kick out the NVA. If they don't want a system of government based off of Wahhabist fundamentalism, which was a reaction against the corruption of the Saudi government and the Western support of that Saudi government, as well as the unilateral support and creation of a government that is apartheid in how it copes with the Arabs within its territory, Wahhabist fundamentalism that led to Al-Qaeda. We want to try to get the military-aged males there that if they want NATO-influenced, supported federal government in the form of Karzai and the government of Afghanistan, the interim government of Afghanistan that we're setting up, then we'll arm them to defend their own villages, and then they can learn what freedom feels like. But as an Afghan villager, who the hell cares, man? Who's going to provide for me a livelihood, get out of my way, little medical support, make sure you're not pulling from me too much of my little income that I get. They've been in survival mode since forever. Before I deployed, I did a briefing for a non-commissioned officers leadership school where I had to fit the history of Afghanistan into 2 minutes. And I just went like this over who then was in control, then was in control, then was in control, then who invaded, then who invaded, then who invaded. It was 2 full minutes I stopped for a little bit occasionally to go on and explain about this event or this thing, but not very much. I couldn't fit it all in. It was just If you've been a victim of somebody else oppressing you for that long, it no longer becomes about whether or not they're going to give me more freedom or not. It's whether or not I can eke out a living, whether or not there's just a little bit of social stability, whether or not I can converse with my friends and family without fearing for my life for having offended somebody. Survival mode, man. That's all they care about. There's 3 provinces I individually armed, built a militia out of every district with arms, trucks, uniforms through the Green Beret teams that were living in those villages. So in those 3 provinces, the outflow from the opium that was in Helmand now is traveling along the rivers to these areas that both the deputy commander of Al-Qaeda and Karzai came from, that were considered kind of so remote farmland that you didn't want to go there. But U.S. Special Forces from 3rd Group initially went there to snag Karzai. It's a great book called The Only Thing Worth Dying For. Okay, that's where I was Tarankot. That's where that book takes place. It's the Uruzgan province. So I was arming Uruzgan, Daikundi, which was pretty much just it's so safe and so it's not even considered. And Zabul, which was kind of the cornerstone to the Pakistani border, and that Pakistani ISI is where you've got the support of the shadow government of the Taliban coming in, because they kind of want to form their own form of government, just like they did after we kicked out the Russians, and they warned us. And they said, hey, in this vacuum, if you don't fund to establish a government, give us money for it, we're going to create our own. And we went, well, we're no longer interested anymore, thanks. So now we got to play nice because they've got nukes and all that sort of thing, but the in-between is an ideological who's going to control, which for the people just means who's going to get me medicine, who's going to get me a sense of stability, who's going to whatever. And then we come along and we're like, oh, and trucks and arms and sweet, I'm voting for these guys. I actually had a Navy corpsman in Kandahar ask me at some point, months into this, I think the light bulb kind of went on. He goes, Sergeant Willits, are these going to civilians? Are these going to the villagers? I said, yeah. So how do you know they're not Taliban? I said, because they're shooting that way. When I got there in 2011, one of the first priorities was actually getting out these vests that Third Group had created to identify this is a local policeman, don't kill thee in the firefight, you know? Like, they're pretty swag. I was pissed off that I didn't steal one and wear it for Halloween every year forever for the rest of my life. I was too good for that. I couldn't slip one into my backpack. But I know some guys from SEAL Team 10, I'm sure have some. And that same guy that was asking this question was mentoring an Afghan and handing me over an inventory list that was 75% wrong on the serial numbers as far as I had found. And I emptied out an entire kicker. You know, 150 AK-47s in one day and talking through them and counting them all, and there's just random, you're just kind of going, hey, try to find this, and thankfully I had some help, one other guy. And you know, that was a lot of excitement. That really was. It was so cool to be able to be welcomed by these teams, my true heroes, out in the middle of what was the largest special forces mission since Vietnam. I mean, I would live in their team house for a week and then I'd fly over to the next one, fly over here, arrange them, but all night long I'd be up at their computer, hacked back into my own email at the CJSOTF and trying to coordinate air movement requests and trying to coordinate my own movement, trying to coordinate who needed me where and what problems were they facing so that me and my interpreter could go out and talk to their Afghan sidekick one-on-one and say, here's how it's supposed to work. What's the problem? And then go up the logistics chain and fix the problem. I had a Green Beret medic who just was shocked. I showed up with a beard. The captain was like, oh, what, are they just letting anybody grow one of those now? Sir, with all respect, I want to make sure that when I look at your Afghan district chief of police or your Afghan local police chief, and I tell him I can get him weapons, trucks, ammo, uniforms, med kits had been floated for the idea. I tell him those things. I don't want him thinking I'm just a little chai boy. The medic just doubled over laughing. I wore a beard because they needed to understand that I was an adult that had the authority to give to them these things. I fly out to Khazaruzgan, which is actually, I think, where Karzai is officially, I think that is his official hometown, I think. And this is an isolated team. There's no road support between the two. That road has never been cleared. There's just, bombs that are going back 20, 30 years just buried in there, So the mechanic that they had on hand, contracted out, civilian, former special dude, said, hey, Willits, man, can you get me these parts? See, we had an Afghan special forces team living with the Green Berets, which is what they do, to teach the Afghans how to continue the mission once we pulled out, and then they would continue to train and develop these villagers to defend themselves. It briefs really good. It's a good idea. Ferry's high on that one, right? Willits, I need these parts. Can you get them to me? Of course I can. There's a part shop right next to where I am staying in Tarankout. Give me the list. Cool. I had to hunt 2 Afghan supply depots, basically. Say, hey, I need these parts through my interpreter. Everything's good to go until about a week or so, I get a phone call. I've got a cell phone and an interpreter, and that's all the support I'm giving, folks. I had to make this happen, And I did, largely. It was awesome. But then I got a phone call. Hey, Sergeant Willits, this is a rank higher from the command team higher than the Combined Forces of Special Operations, Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force. This is the command that is coordinating everything in Afghanistan between conventional, special, multinational, whatever. Oh, hi, how are you today? I'm actually in a forklift with one of the Ford Rangers, straddled it because right after I delivered it. months getting these things out there. One of the Afghans took it his own personal vehicle and tried to wire up a sound system and blew the wiring harness within a week. So then I'm having to fly it back, take it over to the shop, blah, blah, blah. And all this stuff is supposed to be happening through the Afghans. But it can't. There's no way. The logistics structure of the Afghan government is not in place yet, and we've made a lot of promises. So, hey, I gotta get this done until it can take on a life of its own. I'm actually in that truck, got the 10K sideways, like I said, I don't have any support. I'm just lifting it over a gate, and the gate guard's just like, how did I know that was you? And I'm just laughing and bouncing around, hoping it doesn't tip me forward and all that. I actually told her, I said, hey, if you see the back wheels of this thing, I don't know how high I'm gonna need to get. I don't know what kind of angle. Can you please, if the back wheels lift off, can you please tell me so I can not raise it any higher and hopefully not wreck both of these vehicles? It'd be kind of nice. And she's just laughing. But that was just how I had to perform. That was it. So you can see where I'd be a little frustrated when this is within the week. I had a phone call. What's this I hear you're trying to get some Afghan parts out to Khazar-Uzgan? So, well, I got a list of parts. I'm going to put them on a pallet. I'm going to fly out to Khazar-Uzgan. What's the deal? He said, well, you can't do that. Oh, I can't? Shit, the parts store's right there, the pallets right there, the freaking helicopter's going in and out. Why can't I? I can walk over, I can put the parts on there myself. I can 10K with a forklift over to the airfield. Why? What do you mean I can't? I've always had a problem with that sound that you guys put at the end of can. This guy says, well, that's not how the contract reads. It's a fucking contract? What the hell are you talking about? It's not, huh? That is not how it's done. That's not the contract. That's not how it works. If you do that, you will go to jail. Wow. There must be a misunderstanding. Where are you at? Well, I'm in Kabul. Cool. Do you come down to Kandahar very often? Yeah, I'll be there next week. Great, I'll see you there. I knew exactly where it was going to be. No problem. I was livid. I'm glad I didn't break that phone. So I go down to ask him. Great, so what's the deal? He's completely kitted up, shaking his boots, terrified because it's probably the first time he's ever been within, handshaking distance of an Afghan, right? Because he's at the Afghan National Police Training Facility of Kandahar, where my interpreter's father is the future plans and operations dude, So I've got connections there. I'm cool. I go out and hang out with, eat food, drink chai, play chess. I got no problems going out there. I have fun. It's like, cool. How does your contract tell me I'm supposed to win this war? Well, the Afghans need to take the parts to the team and get it fixed. Cool. It's a mine-laden road. Nobody's driven down there. No, it's impassable. It's impassable. Without air support, there's no way it happens. What's your next fucking stupid idea? Well, then the Afghan National Army needs to clear the road. It's like, cool. Well, as far as I've been told, they've got 2 route clearance teams, and they're too busy on Route 1, keeping things clear between Kandahar and Kabul. What's your next fucking stupid idea? Well, I could provide for you a mobile maintenance team. The contract allows 1 more mobile maintenance team within the Uruzgan region. I can provide that for you, and they can go out there and they can repair the vehicles, but you're going to have to provide food and lodging and security and figure out some Afghan convoy that they can roll with, or I can just put the parts on a pallet, ship it out. We've got a mechanic there already. He fixes the trucks. They're mission capable within a week. Sergeant Willits, if you do that, you're going to go to prison. Folks, it wasn't a misunderstanding, except on my part. See, I thought I was waging war to defend the Constitution of the United States against any enemies, foreign and domestic, which means that y'all don't really care how I need to get it done, just as long as I get it done, because it's an emergency, right? Not, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to conduct myself in a manner that actually behooves and enriches whomever offered the good idea fairy a solution through private firms. And the contract is stamped, signed, sealed. This is how you legally have to do it, in which case I risk jail. I was so happy when I was at the Democratic National Convention in preparation to take that building apart in case somebody thought Hillary should have gotten the nomination. I was on standby. We had a team on standby to scrub everybody down naked in case that terrorist event also involved poisoning or gas or some biologic. Man, I remember that night I was so full of hope. Thankfully, the military-industrial complex is no longer the ruling party pushing us towards these contracts that I'd experienced, you know. And I heard Russell Brand talk about it. It's something, you know, most of my Democratic friends talk about the military-industrial complex as if it's the be-all, end-all wasteful spending that Washington has. Folks, the contracting issues that I'm talking about right here is not how Washington, D.C. wages war. It's how Washington, D.C. does anything, foreign or domestic. So let's compare the military-industrial complex, which neither party dares touch, with the regulation and spending that goes on in the healthcare medicinal complex, the Food and Drug Administration and its control over what goes into your body from the soil to your consumption, the Department of Transportation that tells you where you can go, how you can get there, and whether or not you can make it, how you're going to make it, blah, blah, blah. Let's think about our domestic contracts and just how much continual business that gives you. You know what it's like to have it right there in your face. The eyes of the law and the IRS, the important people are corporations, legally considered persons. That way you can sue them and they can pay taxes at 15% while you pay 25%. The preferential treatment is that obvious. But I know what it's like to tell yourself that it wasn't really victimhood. It wasn't really that I've been a victim. It's not really that the problem is too big for me, or the other modes of control is just what everybody does, or I'm just trying to get mine. Everybody else has been getting theirs forever. It's beyond me. Many generations, blah, blah, blah. I understand what it's like to ignore the facts. Right now, our society has a giant pool of capital and a economy based off of a whole bunch of persons that want access to that pool in some form or fashion, because then it's locked in for life. Check out what the New Deal is requiring of our federal government now that the boomers have entered into Social Security age. Just do the math. Non-discretionary funding. There is no option. Locked in, legislated, legal funding. That alone is a train wreck. But we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. We'd rather be distracted and comfortable. I want to be distracted and comfortable. I want to be distracted and comfortable. It's exactly the same as myself as a veteran, 21 years military service, a couple deployments. Some of the guys that, you know, been to Vietnam, a couple of them. There was a guy who was a Coast Guard individual who was never, you know, officially deployed to war, who's seen more crazy shit and been through more traumatic events than any of us. Everybody is dealing with a story as best they can that you know nothing about. And trauma, we assume, must come in the form of war or violence or tragedy But the fact of the matter is, no matter what, from womb to tomb, you're coping with as much trauma as possible because everything is traumatic until you just get used to it, move on, and process. Look at the world in a whole new way. Look at the world in a way that shatters an individual's beliefs about the rightness of the world, degrades trust in leaders, and breeds a sense of disillusionment. It's not just moral injury, folks. That's any traumatic event and how it impacts you. It's just the level of how high that authority is that betrays you. Just how much you as a human being believed in that authority. For a gentleman who in 1988, 87, the Republican National Convention, I would have been 7 years old, standing in my grandfather's living room on the farm, and I remember I just knew that it was a great day for America somehow, and it was awesome, and Reagan, the guy that I had been told was the right answer, was winning, and great's awesome, and then Lee Greenwood comes on. God bless the USA. And 7-year-old me probably stood up and saluted the television, just like the show Tour of Duty, which was my favorite when I was a kid. That's what two of them do during, like, I don't know, they see the flag being raised in Tour of Duty, and they're in a hotel or whatever, and they stand up and they salute that flag. And I think I stood up and I saluted the colored balloons coming down, and Lee Greenwood singing God Bless the USA, and I know that that sounds like a very detailed recollection, but I was just looking this up on YouTube, trying to figure out when was it. I just can remember, for whatever reason, I remember just this emotionally impactful moment where I knew that I was going to be a soldier. And nobody ever told me that Lee Greenwood was a fucking draft dodger. Stand up next to you and defend her still. Sorry, you had your chance, dude. What the fuck you talking about? You're going to stand up next to me. You stand up next to me, I'll fucking break your legs. Thanks. 7-year-old Jason appreciates it. It was an adventure. I survived. Got to see what war is all about in a modern society. And for those of you who, again, military-industrial complex bad, capitalism bad, do you know why we failed in Afghanistan? Do you know why I could have told you in 2011 we were going to fail, and why, according to the Afghan papers, they've known about it for a long time? This is a failed mission, a failing mission, this is an impossible mission, this is not going to happen, but hey, no president wants to be the one to lose the war on terror. I thank Biden for having the balls to actually do it, but when it fell apart, I can't be surprised, and evidently neither was your leadership. Everybody knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when we could finally just make it happen. Just like now. Everybody knows that it's just polluted. When are we going to actually drain the swamp without somebody who's a narcissist that can't get along with anybody else, who seems to think that the presidency is no different than when he was a WWF announcer or a reality television host? I know what it's like to not have the words. I know what it's like to avoid talking about things at all cost. I know what it's like to avoid things that will remind you of this. I know what it's like to, and I know that for most of the people that have ever met me over the past 20 years would say, man, Jason's a freaking train wreck. Can't he just leave it all behind him? Can't he just move on? It was a decade ago, man. It was 12 years ago, man. It was 15 years ago, man. Vietnam guys, man, it was 40 years ago. Can't you just leave it behind? Can't you just figure out a way that your life now won't be poisoned by what happened then? And I'd love to say, yes, I can. Yes, we can. But at the Democratic National Convention, I realized that shoving universal health care down our throats was just the other side of the coin. Bailing out the banks, just the other side of the coin. Hey, we've got this dread new virus that came out, and hey, we need to deal with equality through equating a subjective experience to biological objective reality, and claim that anybody who says different is somehow oppressing people, all in the name of healthcare and gender modification and mandatory vaccines, while we're developing the technology so that we can mandatorily vaccinate you in the name of preventative medicine with these new nanorobots that are going to repel your cells and control your home from inside your brain, and nanolink and blah blah blah. And you try turning off the commercials when all that comes down. No, it's not something that happened 15 years ago or something that happened when I was 23 years old. It happens every year. Hey, are we going to increase our spending by another $37 billion or $45 billion? Because, those jerks across the aisle don't know what they're doing. Oh, I think both sides of the aisle knows exactly what they're doing. They're just beholden to the lobbyists. I'm not terrified of the military-industrial complex anymore, because I've seen what happens when instead, in the name of the health of anybody, something as deadly statistically as the flu can change the face of humanity interaction by literally covering it up, keeping it 6 feet apart, making you go in, get your vaccinations. We'll see what of the small businesses that can't survive won't matter because the rest of them have contracts to the U.S. government to do whatever, blah, 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 or they're big enough that they're too big to fail. Another business that evidently needs to get propped up by our tax-paying dollars whenever the Democrats are in control. Okay? We've got a giant pool of capital, we've got a bunch of lifeguards, and we've got all of the economy of the United States wanting to get at that pool. $439,000 missile to shoot down a Chinese weather balloon. So anger, boy, what a waste, right? Let's compare that with the fact that they just diluted the purchasing power of your dollar by 1.9 trillion in contracts released into the market in the name of infrastructure, investment, and jobs, and build back better. I mean, we the people who wrote the Constitution, I have vowed to defend against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, refer to the people who have breath and hearts. Since the age of industrialization, what we have done instead is to make sure that corporations are considered persons in the eyes of the law, the eyes of the IRS. That way the corporations also pay tax. So your brain might be screaming right now, conspiracy, extremist. And I understand that. Trauma, moral injury, it's hard to process until you're given the language. Your brain wants every possible distraction. Let it simmer, bury it deep down, don't deal with it yet. You have to be given the language. But you also need to be given a safe space to admit to yourself that you have been a victim. When you can admit that, then you can start to eat the elephant in the room. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Now, if I were to choose my menu, given the influence in my domestic life, I would start by eating the donkey and then have a side of elephant. Your employees need to own up to this conversation. Which people are they responsible to? Which persons are they responsible to? The breathing heartbeats or the ones that can afford lobbyists?